Let's go on to the Hornet. Was this the jet you wanted to go on to?
So I actually wanted to fly the F-14 again because going back to Top Gun, that's what I saw at the time. I knew that F-14 was going to be going away, and that I would transition into probably a Super Hornet later on in my career. And so I was like, well, let me fly the F-14 now while I can. But there were two jets at the time that you had to have really good grades at the boat. You had to have good grades to fly the F-14 because it had a really wide wingspan
Mhm.
when it would land, and so there's not a lot of room for error. So they needed you to be solid. And then the EA-6B Prowler was the other one that was you had to have good grades for. And I was not that great landing at the boat. I mean, I had fun and I was safe, but I just wasn't really. My grades weren't that great, so I went from being like number one in my class to being like 10 of 10 at the boat. And so
Wow.
I knew I wasn't going to be getting the Tomcat, which was, the consolation prize was the F-18, and I was like, okay, that's a pretty good one. I'll take that.
Yeah, so what were your first thoughts on the Hornet, and did you know much about the aircraft?
Oh yeah, I mean, anybody that was going through jet training, at that time knew where they could end up and what the mission was, and um, so yeah, I mean, I knew a lot about the jet before I got into it, but still, it was it was there was two things that I remember specifically about going from the T-45 to the F-18. The first one was that they assume at that point that you can fly, like how to fly. So now they're not really teaching you how to fly the jet; they're teaching you how to do the mission.
Yeah.
And so there was only a handful of sorties with an instructor just to kind of make sure that if there's any differences between the two aircraft that you got it, but then you were quickly moving into mission stuff. That's one thing I remember. The other thing is, the afterburner, using the afterburner for the first time, it was like, you feel a kick in the seat and you're like, oh, wow, this is, I'm moving faster. Which was about, it's about the same as going from, prop to a jet in the T-45. It was, took me a couple times to get used to it and get used to the faster speed and yeah.
Awesome stuff. And did you know what models you were going on to? Were there still A models kicking about then, or were they all Cs at that point?
They were all C models. Yeah, so all the fleet squadrons were operating C models. Some were the earlier Lot 10s, and then let me think. The newer ones I think were like 20 Lot 20s or 21s at the time. I can't remember exactly, but I ended up going to VFA 87, which flew Lot 13s and 14s, which were at the time they were known as kind of the pigs of the fleet because they didn't have the upgraded engines, they didn't have the upgraded radar, but they had a bunch of other avionics, so they were heavier. So they tended to be a little bit more sluggish than some of the older Lot 10s, which were super light with the older motors, or the Lot 20s that had the newer motors and had a little bit more thrust.